I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we're going to be continuing on with our 4-part series called Back to the Basics. This week we're going to be talking about word choice. Again, a quick reminder, we are not talking about elementary school concepts, but rather we're talking about it in the context of writing fiction and nonfiction and becoming a better writer. Some of these ideas are very basic and introductory, and some of these are more intermediate skills, and you will learn as you become a better writer and grow and start intriculating some of these. Remember, you don't have to learn all this at once. The first thing I want to talk about is strong verbs. The element of style says that write with nouns and verbs, not adjectives and adverbs. We'll get a little bit into adjectives and adverbs in a minute, but I want to talk about strong verbs and what I call flabby verbs. Flabby verbs are, for example, the woman was walking down the platform with purpose. Doesn't sound like a horrible sentence on its face, but there is a stronger word for walking down the platform with purpose. The verb is strode. The woman strode along the platform. That brings about an imagery that is actually stronger than just walking down with purpose. Now we understand that she's striding down, and that gives us a mental imagery, and that is a better verb to use. A more obvious example, I feel, Jason is a lover of his children. It's a little ambiguous. It doesn't quite make sense. The verb's a little weird. But if we said Jason treasures his children, that makes a lot more sense. And it brings good images up instead of whatever that last sentence might have meant. That's what I mean by strong verbs. And when you are going through your manuscript after you've written a first draft or you're working on your first draft and you're looking at the verbs that you're using, always ask yourself, is there a better, stronger verb that I can use here? Am I being too verbose? If you remember, we talked about that in the previous video. Are you being too verbose? Or is there a way to say this in a faster, quicker way that makes more sense? Strode makes more sense than walking down the platform with purpose. And that is what you have to ask yourself as you're working through. Next thing we're going to talk about is adverbs. Now, when I was in grad school, one of the things that I was told was to cut all the adverbs from my writing. And Stephen King says the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Adverbs aren't necessarily horrible, but there is a happy medium when you're using them. You have to go back to the question I just asked a minute ago. Instead of an adverb, is there a stronger verb that I can use here? Almost always the answer is yes. The girl cried loudly, holding her stomach painfully, as opposed to the girl howled, clutching her stomach in pain. There, loudly is not a bad word, but howled and clutched her stomach in pain brings definitely different connotations to that sense, and they're stronger verbs. They give us a stronger imagery, and that's what we want. We want our readers to have these strong imagery when they're reading our books so that they understand what we're trying to say. You have to be really careful with adverbs in dialogue tags. They are insidious in dialogue tags. She said loudly, he said distinctly, he said calmly. Find other verbs that you can use there. I can promise you that there's much better ones than he said loudly. Okay. And you can find them and you can insert them and give your reader a better idea of what it is that you mean exactly. Give them the tone of voice. What does loudly look like for your character? And let your reader kind of play along with that. If you're writing nonfiction, there's always a stronger verb. And here's the thing with adverbs. You can put them in there, but speckle them in. Treat them like pepper. If you have too much pepper, your dish tastes not good. But if you have a little bit here and there, they don't stick out as much, and they have the strength of a regular verb. Adjectives, on the other hand, are descriptors, and they're sometimes necessary, right? We can pair them together. They're soft and warm, slow and monotonous, short and easy. Pairings work really well, but they're not always necessary. Mark Twain says that when you catch an adjective, kill it. No, I don't mean utterly, but kill most of them, and then the rest will be valuable. I love that quote because I think that that's really how an adjective should be. Another bad example, good example, the big cat howled loudly. Or you could say the big fat Himalayan howled loudly. Now we got a whole bunch of adjectives in there. Or we could say, and here's where you don't need the adjective, Or just a little bit. The big cat leapt out of the bushes, hissing and howling. Now we've added action to that scene. We have the important details and we're moving the story forward and we're adding action. This is where that balance comes. You know, if you're writing sentences and if you're right now, you're thinking about your story and you're like, oh my gosh, I write adverbs and adjectives all the time. It's okay. It's fine. Just slow down a little when you're writing and you continue to write and see if there's stronger verbs that you can use there, and make sure that you're getting to the point and that you're not overusing your adjectives and your adverbs. If they're there, that's fine. Make sure that you don't have them everywhere. So the next thing I want to talk about is description. And when it comes to word choice, you know, we talked a little bit about filtering words in the last video, and that's, you know, describing things from your character's perspective. But we're talking specifically about word choice or making sure you have a broader appeal. If you're writing about New York City, for example, don't assume that your reader knows what New York City looks like. You might have a reader who's picked up your book in the, you know, country or rural area of Nebraska. They've never been to New York City and they may never go to New York City. And you have to describe it in a way using just the right words, but not being overly verbose. You need to describe it in a way that they'll understand and relate. That's difficult because you've got so many different types of readers. If there's an interview in your book, let's say you're writing a nonfiction book and you have an interview, describe what the person looks like. Describe the atmosphere of the place that you interviewed them at. Give us just a little bit, not a lot, we don't need tons, but give us a little bit. I have read interviews that somebody's given with somebody, and I'm never sure if they interviewed the person directly or if they were on the phone or what. And that's a little confusing. And then I'm not sure if they haven't interviewed the person, do they even know what this person looks like? You know, what's their tone of voice like? If you talk to them on the phone, just like something, give the reader something to go off of so that they understand, a descriptor, a couple of descriptive words so that they understand. I will say this caveat, it is no longer considered good in modern writing to use food as metaphors for people's hair or skin color. Don't describe people as having skin like chocolate, or describing somebody as skin as vanilla, or, you know, just avoid food. Okay, just avoid food altogether. We don't need those words in there, especially because, as I talked about with the strong verbs, there are better words, descriptor words, to describe those things. So using me, for example, because I'm super pale. Say, Venus always wondered what it would be like to be tan. But the only way that she would know is at the bottom of a bottle of self-tanning lotion. That is the descriptor. It is, you know what we're talking about. You know that I'm pale based off of that description, and we even get to know a little bit about that character. I don't actually care if I tan, by the way. I gave up on that when I was like 15, so whatever. I just get more freckles, so what's the point? But that gives you an example of a way that you can describe a character in a way that doesn't include food and doesn't include a more cliche statement either. You can put those little words in there, and it makes just as much sense, and it's more interesting than saying she had chocolate skin or vanilla skin or peach skin. And scatter those throughout. Just don't throw them all in a lump. I know writers who do this. Robin Hobb is a good example, who really likes to put big chunks of description together. I consider that exposition. And if I ran across it while I was editing, I would probably advise the author to kind of break it up a bit more. If you want to do that, though, there's no rule that says you can't. Just be careful how you do it and make sure that you're doing it with strong words, strong verbs, and strong descriptors. Of course, we've got a caveat, which is the 50-cent words. I don't know if you've ever heard of a 50-cent word. A 50-cent word are those big, long words you add to your writing to make yourself sound more verbose, using a 50-cent word there. I do actually speak in 50-cent words a lot, which also means that sometimes I have to tell people what I mean. And I use 50-cent words with like little kids, and then they're like, what does that mean? So, maybe here, neither here nor there. You don't need to have these words in there to sound intelligent or to make the writing good. I would say the caveat for this, of course, is academic writing, where it's kind of expected that you would use 50-cent words. But for the most part, if you're writing fiction or nonfiction, you don't have to have tons of 50-cent words. Write in a way that, again, with the filtering words, in a way that your character would talk. Sometimes the 50-cent words almost feel like an authorial intrusion. It feels like the author is stepping in for a moment to use this word that they know that there's no way that their character would know. And so you have to be careful with that. Another caveat is historical fiction, because you might want to insert some words that are time period correct. So you kind of dab them in throughout the piece so that readers get a kind of an understanding of maybe the way that they spoke back then, or some of the words that they use. I mean, there's so many words from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance that we just don't use anymore, and if you kind of scatter those throughout, it makes the story more interesting. It makes it feel a little bit more historical, and I think that that's a lot of fun. You gotta be careful not to do it all the time, or if you do, make sure, like M.T. Anderson and Octavian Nothing, that is what you're going for. You understand that your readers might not understand sometimes, and this is what you're doing, and just commit. So in either way, it's going to take some research. So just kind of decide what it is you're going for, and who your audience is. I mentioned a little bit in the previous video about verbal tics. I'm going to talk about it again because they are so insidious, and they end up like just inserting themselves in there. The just, the seems, the ever. Sometimes our own like verbal tics are the things that we say. And so I have a bad habit of starting sentences with so. A sentence should not start with so when I'm writing. Writing's a little bit more formal, unless we're writing dialogue. It's a little bit more formal, and so you shouldn't be starting sentences with so and and okay. Those are your verbal tics, and we all have them. But be very careful not to insert them into your writing, because it comes across as a little elementary. Finally, and the last thing when it comes to word choice is, I call it the read aloud test. And this is a challenge that you need to do. Even if you don't think that anybody's ever going to read your book out loud, assume that your reader is going to read your book out loud, or somebody's going to turn it into an audiobook or something. Read your book out loud. Read it moderately slowly, not super slow, but just read through it at a normal kind of pace. And if you start tripping up on words, stop. Go back to the beginning of the sentence. Read it again. Why are you tripping over that word? Does it not work there? Is it because you've got another word that sounds just like it right before or right after? What's going on there? It might mean that you need to change your word choice, because basically you created a tongue twister. And you didn't mean to. It didn't feel like a tongue twister when you were typing it out, but now that you're saying it out loud, it's totally a tongue twister. It doesn't roll off the tongue, or it doesn't make sense, or the sentence feels really weird now. For some reason, this sentence just doesn't flow well, and it's because of those word choices that you put in there. And so I think the read aloud test is very important to make sure that you are using not just the right words, but that your words are not something that will cause a reader to stumble. This is really important for our younger readers. Picture books, early readers, things that kids are going to read out loud. You absolutely should read your stuff out loud and make sure that there's nothing that a child is going to trip over, and that the words, are easily readable to an adult reading them. And obviously, there's always a caveat. The caveat being that if you're trying to go for trippy words, you're trying to create tongue twisters, you're trying to be like Dr. Seuss and create these kind of fun, pentameter poetry things going on, that's a little bit different. But for the most part, if you're just reading even through your nonfiction book about, the Chinese government and infrastructure, it should still be readable, and you should not be tripping over words. So I do challenge you, if you are currently working on something and you're kind of at the end of a chapter or whatever, go back and read that chapter and make sure that it flows well and that your reader can read it out loud. This is the end of part 2 of our Back to Basics series. I'll be back next week, where we'll be talking about paragraphs. Don't forget to press like and subscribe to our channel. I post new writing tips almost every Friday. I've been Venus with Galaxy Ink. I hope your writing is out of this world.